She took in a grumpy stray wolf and fed him for 3 days. Then the Alpha King arrived to claim his debt, a story in one part. She found him on a Tuesday, not a metaphor, not a dream. A Tuesday, the most boring day of the week, the kind of day that smells like leftover soup and has nothing to recommend it. And there he was, collapsed between her kale and her rosemary, like someone had dropped him there on purpose, just to ruin her evening. Nara had been coming home from the village market with a basket of parsnips, 2 jars of honey, and a headache she had been nursing since morning. The market was always like this. Too many people, too many opinions. Old Garrett from the grain stall who liked to talk about his knee and expected her to pretend to be surprised each time. She had nodded in the right places, sold her dried herbs, bought what she needed, and gotten out before anyone could ask her to stay for the Harvest Festival planning meeting, which she had been skillfully avoiding for 3 years running. She had taken the long path home through the woods because she always took the long path, because the long path did not have people on it, and people were the reason for the headache. She liked the sound of her own boots on the dirt. She liked the way the trees went quiet right before dusk, like they were paying attention to something she couldn't see yet. She liked the 37 seconds between the forest's edge and her front gate, when she could pretend she lived in a world where nobody needed anything from her. Then she opened the gate and saw him. He was enormous. That was the first thing. The second thing was the crossbow bolt sticking out of his left flank, which explained the blood soaking into the soil around her rosemary bush. The rosemary she had been coaxing back to health for 3 weeks because her grandmother had planted it 30 years ago, and she had made a silent, unspoken promise about that. The third thing, and this one took a moment longer to get to, standing there at her own garden gate with her parsnips cooling in the basket, was that he was a wolf. Not a small wolf, not the kind that came through occasionally looking for scraps, the ones she had learned to shoo with a firm word and a loud clap. A wolf the size of a cart horse, silver-black, with a coat that would have been remarkable in any other context if it weren't matted with mud and blood, and what appeared to be pine sap dried along the left shoulder. He was breathing in slow, deliberate pulls, the way things breathe when they are deciding whether to keep doing it. He looked at her. She looked at him. "You're in my kale," she said. He did not move. Nara stood there for a long moment, basket in hand, parsnips going cold, and thought very carefully about all the things a reasonable person would do in this situation. A reasonable person would back away slowly. A reasonable person would go to the village and find someone with the right tools and the right knowledge for dealing with a wounded creature 3 times the size of a sensible dog. A reasonable person would not walk forward, set her basket down on the garden wall, roll up her sleeves, and crouch next to a wolf the size of a small building to look at the bolt in his side. She had never been reasonable in any way that counted. "That's deep," she said, not to him specifically, more to the situation in general. She had seen wounds before. Her grandmother had taught her to see them clearly, without flinching, to look at what was actually there before deciding what to do about it. "That's going to need to come out," he growled, low and long, like thunder deciding whether to commit. "I know," she said. "I'd growl too." She went inside, got her kit, the worn leather roll of tools she had learned from her grandmother, who had learned from her grandmother before that, a long line of women who had figured out that things in pain needed tending, and that waiting for someone else to do it was a waste of time. She had the yarrow, the packed herbs that slowed bleeding, the ones that fought infection, the clean cloth strips she kept in more quantities than any single person should need and yet always managed to use. She came back out with all of it and set it on the garden wall. The wolf had not moved, had not run, which surprised her. She had half expected to come back to an empty garden and a blood trail going back into the trees. He was still there, watching her with eyes that were too steady for something in that much pain. Too aware, like he was watching her the way you watch someone you are still deciding about, not with fear, not with aggression, but with the careful, patient attention of something working out a problem. "I'm going to pull it," she told him. "It's going to hurt. If you bite me, I'm going to be very annoyed, and then I'm going to do it anyway, so you might as well just let me." A pause. Then, slowly, He put his great head down on his paws. She pulled the bolt. He did not bite her. His whole body went rigid from nose to tail, and he made a sound she felt in her back teeth, and his head jerked up, and for one terrible second she thought she had miscalculated something. And then the sound stopped, and his head went back down, and he was still, and breathing, and the bolt was in her hand. She worked efficiently after that, the herbs packed into the wound, her hands doing what they had been trained to do since she was small enough to stand on a stool to reach her grandmother's workbench. She bound it as well as you could bind a wound on something that size with what she had. When she was done, she sat back on her heels and looked at him. He looked back. "You're going to stay there and rest," she said. "I'll bring you something." She went inside and made venison broth. She had a clay bowl that she had bought at a market years ago, too large for any normal household purpose, kept because she couldn't figure out what else to do with it, sitting in the back of the cupboard waiting. Now she knew. She filled it, let it cool until it was right, and brought it out and set it on the ground near his head. He stared at it, stared at her, then, very slowly, lowered his nose to the bowl and drank. She watched until he finished, picked up the empty bowl. "You're welcome," she said to no one in particular, and went inside to eat her own dinner alone, which was the same as every other evening, and felt briefly different, which she did not examine. She ate her soup, she washed up, she went to bed. Outside, the wolf breathed in slow, steady pulls, and the night came in, and neither of them went anywhere. The first morning, she came downstairs and he was at the door. Not inside, just at the door. The garden gate had been open. She had not latched it the night before, which she decided not to read anything into, and somehow he had moved from her kale beds to the front step without making a sound she had heard, and he was sitting there when she came down, with her hair still messy from sleep, so large his shoulders were above the door handle, watching the mist come off the tree line in the gray early light. She opened the door. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Feeling better?" she asked. He turned and walked, slowly and with considerable dignity, for something that had been bleeding in a vegetable bed 12 hours earlier, back to the spot in the garden where he had spent the night, which had apparently become his place now, though nobody had discussed this, or agreed to it, or even suggested it. "Right," she said. "Breakfast, then." She made more broth. She had a rough idea of what a wolf of his size might need. More than a normal wolf, certainly. Probably more than she was providing, but she boiled what she had and didn't overthink it. She brought the bowl out. He ate. She went back inside. She had a full morning ahead. Herbs to sort, a batch of poultice to prepare for old Bryn down the road, who had a bad knee and was too stubborn to rest it, a window ledge that needed recalking before the rains came, a letter she had been meaning to write for 2 weeks and kept finding reasons to put off. She sat at the table by the window and got to work. He lay in the garden. She could see him from where she sat. The silver black of his coat caught the morning light in a way that was objectively interesting, the same way anything large and unexpected in a familiar space is interesting. Your eyes kept going there before you told them not to. She let them. It seemed pointless to fight it. She worked and talked, the way she always did, filling the silence with whatever was in her head. She had done it for years, living alone. It kept things from going too quiet, kept her thoughts from piling up in corners. "The rosemary has been struggling since the frost," she said, not quite to him, not quite to herself either, to the middle space, the way she always talked when she was working. "My grandmother planted it the year she moved here, said it wanted to grow toward this particular hillside, something about the angle of the morning light. I've never been sure if that was true, or if she just liked the story. She was sorting dried yarrow, pulling out the stems that had gone papery, and keeping the good ones. She had a way of deciding what things wanted, and then acting like they'd told her directly. Very confident in her interpretations. Very convincing." He kept watching her through the window glass. "She used to say you have to threaten rosemary," Nara continued. "Tell it what the alternative is. She'd crouch down right next to it and look it in the leaves and say, 'Shape up, or you're going in the chicken pot with the autumn herbs.'" Very serious about it. The rosemary always listened, I think because it believed she'd actually do it. She had that kind of face. She set aside a bundle of the good yarrow and started on the next. I've tried. I cannot do it with any real conviction. I don't think the rosemary believes me. And honestly, it's right not to. I'd just plant something else and feel bad about it. She glanced up. He was still watching. You could probably do it, she said. You've got exactly the right kind of face for threats. A sound from outside. Low, brief, gone before she had fully heard it. It did not sound like a growl. It did not sound like distress or warning or any of the things wolves were supposed to sound like in a situation like this. It sounded like the beginning of something that stopped itself before it became something else, like laughter that changed its mind at the last second. She went back to her yarrow. He went back to watching the tree line. In the afternoon, she walked down to collect water from the stream. He followed. Not obviously, not close, staying at the tree line when she went down the muddy bank, back at the garden wall when she returned with her pails. Always there, always just outside the boundary of whatever space she was occupying. It should have felt like being watched. It did not. It felt like having someone nearby who was not going to need anything from her, which was a different thing entirely, and one she did not have a good word for. She understood, from somewhere she could not have pointed to, that this distinction mattered more than she was ready to say. That evening she read by the fire. An old book, the kind that opened to its own favorite pages. He settled outside the door, closer than the garden. She could hear his weight on the step through the old wood when he shifted. She read. He breathed. The fire crackled. Before she went up to bed, she stood at the door for a moment. "Good night," she said to the general direction of the step. That sound again. The not grill. The thing that stopped before it finished. Except this time it finished. Just barely. Just enough to land. She went up. She slept better than she had in months. She did not examine why. The second day he followed her more openly. Not close enough to crowd. Not close enough to demand anything. 10 paces back when she went to the garden. 15 when she walked the path down to old Bryn's cottage with the poultice for his knee. He stopped at the edge of her property and waited there while she was inside with Bryn, who had opinions about his knee and the weather and the state of the Eastern Road and his nephew's work habits, and was the kind of man who talked around what he meant until you figured it out for him. "My nephew's visiting," Bryn said, which was code for, "I won't be doing the exercises you gave me because I'll have company and I don't want to look ridiculous." Nara nodded and said she would come back next week to check on him in person. He looked immediately relieved and offered her tea, and she said she had to get back, which was true. When she came out, the wolf was where she had left him. He fell into step, 10 paces back, same as before, and they walked home together through the afternoon light, in the easy, uncomplicated way of two creatures who had arrived at an understanding about distance without discussing it. In the afternoon, she sat in the garden with her mending and her ongoing quiet argument with the rosemary. The wolf lay nearby. He was healing well. She had checked the wound that morning when he'd allowed her close enough, which was more than she had expected, and the packing was holding, and the edges were beginning to close the right way. "Another day," she'd told him, examining the wound carefully. "Maybe 2, and you'll be sound." He had given her a look she interpreted as, "I know." She told him about the herbs she was sorting. She told him about her grandmother's system, the way the old woman had organized her knowledge, half written down in a book with faded ink and half just living in Nara's hands now, muscle memory she had built by watching and doing until she stopped being able to tell the difference between what she had learned and what she simply knew. She told him about the winter coming in early, how she could feel it in the quality of the morning light, the color the leaves were going at the tops of the tallest trees first, the way the birds had started acting certain. He listened with the same complete attention he gave everything, not politely, not the way people listen when they're waiting for a pause to say their own thing. Actually listening in the way you listen to something you find genuinely interesting, which is a different quality entirely. She noticed this. She filed it somewhere. That evening she made dinner and brought his bowl out before sitting down herself. She ate at the window so she could hear him in the garden. It was a small adjustment to her routine. She did not note it down as a change. Just before midnight she woke, not to a sound, but to the absence of one. The weight on the step was gone. She lay in the dark and listened to the silence, and did not go back to sleep easily. He came back an hour before dawn. She heard the gate. She heard him settle. She closed her eyes and lay still until the morning came. On the step, when she opened the door, a rabbit. Clean killed, neatly placed. Placed the way you set something down when you mean it, not dropped the way you drop something when you're done with it. She stood in her doorway in the gray morning and looked at it. He was in the garden, sitting straight, watching her. She stood there a moment and thought about her grandmother, who had always said the language of what people do is clearer than the language of what they say. She thought about 3 days of broth and yarrow and the clay bowl that had been waiting in the cupboard for exactly this kind of moment. "Thank you," she said. She meant it in all the directions it reached. The third morning, she came downstairs and stopped at the bottom step. There was a man at her hearth. That sentence does not capture the experience of it, which was this. She came down the stairs with her hair still loose from sleep, wearing her oldest house dress, the gray one with the frayed hem that she wore when nobody was going to see her, and which had now been seen, and there was a stranger crouched in front of her fire, and her first thought was not danger. Her first thought was, the wolf is gone. Her second thought followed half a second later, carrying its implications with it. He was enormous, even crouching. He had her wool blanket, the thick brown one, her grandmother's, from the back of the reading chair, wrapped around his lower half with the careful consideration of a man making a concession to someone else's comfort rather than his own. Silver hair, the color of the wolf's coat, shoulders wide enough to make the fireplace look proportionate. He was looking at the fire with the same focused attention he had given the tree line for 2 days. He turned when she stopped on the step. His eyes were the same color as the wolf's eyes, not similar, identical. Then she walked down the last step and into the kitchen. "Tea," she said, because it was the most reasonable thing available, and she was going to be reasonable about this. "Yes," he said. His voice was the low register of the sounds the wolf had made. Lower version of the same thing. She filed this alongside the eyes and the color of his hair, and moved on. She put the kettle on. She moved around her kitchen with the efficiency of a woman who had decided that the most useful thing she could do right now was make tea, and so that was what she was doing, and he watched her work with the same quality of attention she had noticed for 2 days. Total, patient, unbothered by silence or by his own extraordinary circumstances. She put 2 cups on the table. She sat. He arranged himself into the chair across from her, which required some accommodation for someone of his size in a chair built to normal specifications, and he did it without comment or awkwardness. They sat at her kitchen table in the early morning. "You should have told me," she said. Not angry, just, "This is a fact, and true things deserve to be spoken." "You didn't ask," he said. "I don't typically ask people what species they are when I'm pulling crossbow bolts out of them." Something moved in his face. Not quite a smile, just the territory before one. "That seems like a reasonable policy." "I think so." She drank her tea. "How long have you been able to shift?" "Always. It's not something that starts, it's something you are. And the wound made you stay in wolf form." "Partly. It was also—" He paused. He seemed to consider words carefully, not for evasion, but for accuracy. "It was easier to be taken care of in a form that didn't have to account for itself." She looked at him. "You didn't want to explain." "No." "Fair," she said. She got up and refilled the kettle because the morning was cold, and a second cup felt like the right idea. She stood at the basin and looked out at her garden, the kale, the rosemary, the bare patch near the wall where he had lain for 2 days, and thought about what it meant that she was not more surprised by any of this. She decided it meant she had been expecting something without knowing she was expecting it. The strange, easy company, the rabbit, the sound that kept almost finishing, these had been building towards something, and this was it. "Kale," he said, from behind her. She turned. "My name," he said, "since you haven't asked." "Nara," she said, "since you probably already know." "I know." She turned back to the basin and smiled at the window glass where he couldn't see it. She made the second cup and sat back down. "Your people are coming," she said. "Today?" "Today." Rin will have triangulated the route by now. Rin, my first beta, very thorough, very worried, probably. And then you'll leave. And then I'll need to. She looked at him across the table. The wound is nearly healed. You move like yourself again. Yes. Good. She finished her tea. Then you should go out and talk to my Rosemary before they arrive. He looked at her. You said you would, she said. I want to see if it works. They went outside. He crouched next to the plant and said something to it very quietly, something she did not catch. She stood beside him and did not ask what it was. Some conversations had their own privacy, even when you heard the voice that made them. He looked up after. The morning had cleared, and the light was the good direct kind, and his face in it was the face of someone very old, who had learned to show very little, but had not, apparently, learned to show nothing. There was something in it, when he looked at her, that was not as settled as the rest of him. More tea? She said. Yes, he said. And then you can tell me what the old law actually says about a 3-day debt, not the short version. He looked at her. You want the long version. I want the true version. They're the same. Then you can tell me over tea, she said, before your very thorough beta arrives and complicates the morning. They went back inside. She was washing the cups from the second round when she heard them. Horses. Many horses, moving with the organized intention of a procession that knew where it was going and had been told to arrive in a way that announced itself. They came through the tree line at midday. 20 riders. More behind them. Dark cloaks with the mark at the shoulder that she didn't know but which clearly meant something. You could see it in the way they rode, the way they held themselves, the quality of the horses. The man at the front was young, capable, and carrying the expression of someone who had been worried for 8 days and was working very carefully to look professional about the fact that the worry was over. He brought the group to a stop outside her gate. He looked at the cottage. He looked at Kale, who had come to stand in the doorway wearing her grandfather's too short trousers and a shirt that pulled across the shoulders, holding a third cup of tea with the relaxed authority of a man in his own home on an ordinary morning. Rin, she would learn the name shortly, managed one small, contained expression. One thing, quickly held in place by professional discipline. My lord, he said, carefully, we have been searching for 8 days. I know, Kale said. The council has convened twice. Lord Devon has filed. Rhine. My lord. I know. The 20 riders were very still in the way that people who have been trained are still when they understand that the right thing to do is nothing. Rin looked at Nara. She was in her garden, between the rosemary and the kale, holding the parsnip basket she had gone out to check because it seemed like a practical thing to do while the situation developed. Rin looked at the borrowed clothes. He looked at the clay bowl at the base of the gatepost. He assembled a series of facts with visible effort. The Alpha King, Rin said, beginning again at a slightly more formal register, extends his gratitude to, I'll speak for myself, Kale said. Rin stopped. Behind him, 20 horses and 20 riders achieved collective stillness. Kale stepped down from the doorway. He crossed the garden the way he crossed every space, without hurrying, without performing, without calculating whether he had a right to be there, because that question had apparently stopped being relevant to him sometime in the distant past. He came to stand in front of Nara. She looked up at him. You pulled the bolt, he said. You were in my kale, she said. You fed me. You were hungry. For 3 days. You were hungry for 3 days. He was quiet for a moment. I owe you a debt, he said. The way he said it had weight behind it. Not performed weight, real weight, the kind that accumulated over time. Pack law, old law. Life protected, 3 days sheltered, 3 days fed. That is not a small thing. I didn't do it because of law, she said. I didn't know what you were until this morning. I know that. I did it because you were bleeding in my kale. I know. Then we're settled. No debt. That's not how this kind works. Not hard. Just a fact. The debt doesn't require intention. The law measures action. What was given was given. Then the law is inconvenient. Most useful laws are. Behind him, Rin had achieved a quality of professional stillness that was almost architectural. The 20 riders had found the trees very interesting. The trees were holding steady. What does it mean? Nara said. Practically. Not the old language. What does it actually mean, day to day? It means, he said, that the protection of my pack, my line, extends to you, to your home, to your name. Anyone who moves against you moves against the king's line. A pause. And it means I am personally obligated to you until the debt is discharged. Discharged how? When you say it is. She looked at him. The afternoon light was doing something specific to the silver in his hair that she noticed and mentally set aside for later consideration. How long does it take? She said. Typically, for something like this, the corner of his mouth, just the edge. Depends on the method, he said. She stood there for a moment and thought about 3 days of broth and a rabbit placed carefully on a step and a sound that had finally decided to finish itself. I'm going inside to make tea, she said. If you want to discuss the specifics, you know where I am. She walked to the cottage door, silence behind her, long enough that she counted it, then boots on the garden path. She put the kettle on. Rin made camp at the tree line, without being asked, and without asking, which Nara appreciated more than she said. She went out late in the afternoon, after she and Kale had sat with the long version of the debt law and 2 more cups of tea and what had started as a discussion and become something that moved slower than a discussion, and brought tea down to the camp because it was a long ride back and the evening was cold. Rin received the cup with the expression of a man recalibrating something. You're the herbalist, he said, from the edge of the village. Nara. Rin. He held the cup properly, with both hands. He was younger up close than he'd looked on horseback, early 30s maybe, with the particular quality of someone who had spent those years being responsible for things heavier than himself, and had gotten good at not showing how heavy they were. He told you, he said, what he is. He didn't need to tell me. I worked it out. Something moved in Rin's face. Confirmation, maybe, of a thing he had been quietly checking. He's normally. He stopped. People usually don't. He's careful. He came to my garden and collapsed, she said. The options for staying mysterious were limited. Rin almost smiled. No, he said. I suppose they were. She looked at the camp, the tents going up in the efficient way of people who did this often, the horses settled, the 20 riders moving around each other without friction. You've all been looking for 8 days, she said. Yes. That's a long time. He looked at his tea. For him, yes. He goes off alone sometimes, usually not this long. A pause. The bolt worried me when we found the trail. The blood. It was bad, she said, but he was careful with it. Didn't move more than he had to. He said you treated it. It needed treating. Rin was quiet for a moment. Then, he hasn't stayed anywhere more than a single night in 11 years, he said. I thought you should know. She looked at him. He looked back with the steady eyes of someone who was saying something on purpose. Thank you, she said. She went back to the cottage. Kale was at the table. She had started simply accepting this, the same way she had accepted the wolf in the garden. Not an intrusion, just the current state of things. What happened 11 years ago, she said. He looked up. Rin talks at the right times, she said. What happened? A pause. Not reluctant, selecting. I stopped having a good reason to stay anywhere, he said. The kind of reason that made the staying feel different from passing through. He looked at the fire. It was easier to keep moving. What changed? He turned and looked at her. Directly. The not-quite smile was nowhere near his face. I came to a garden, he said, and someone fed me from a clay bowl and talked to their rosemary about me and didn't seem to find anything strange about any of it. She sat down. The debt, she said. I've been thinking about it. I know. It resolves when I say it does. Yes. Then I'm saying, she stopped. She had spent the afternoon choosing the words for this, and they were still not quite right, but she had decided that not quite right said honestly was better than perfectly right said too late. I'm saying I don't want it to resolve, not because I need the protection, not because of the law or the pack or what it means for territories and lines. I'm saying I don't want it to resolve, because the only version of it that makes sense to me is one where you keep coming back. He was very still. Before the cold, she said, and after it, and the one after that, something happened in his face. Not the almost smile, not the patience, something that had been waiting a long time to arrive somewhere, and had now arrived. "The debt doesn't require that," he said carefully. "I know," she said. "I'm not talking about the debt." The fire burned. The evening came in cold through the cracks in the old walls. Outside, the camp at the tree line had settled into the organized quiet of 20 people who had accepted the situation and were making the best of it with professional grace. "Tea first," he said. "And then I want to hear more about the rosemary. You want to hear me argue with a plant. I want to hear you explain why you won't threaten it. I told you, it doesn't believe me." "I think it does," he said. "I think you believe it doesn't, because believing it would mean committing to the threat." She looked at him. "That's a very specific thing to say." "It's what I think." She got up and put the kettle on. He left with the morning. She was up before the dawn, the way she always was, body having long ago decided that early mornings were hers alone. She made tea. She heard the camp beginning to stir, low voices, horses, the organized sound of people preparing to go somewhere. She brought 2 cups to the gate. Rin nearly walked into her on his way up the path. He recovered well, because he recovered everything well. "Oh," he said. "Tea," she said. "You have a long ride, and the north path is bad this time of year." He took the cup with both hands. "Thank you," he said, and meant it in the specific way of someone who was thanking her for more than the tea. "He'll be back," she said. "Not a question." "Yes," Rin said. "He will." He paused. "That's new. Just so you know." She nodded. He nodded. He took his tea back down toward the camp, and she stood at the gate and watched the last mist lift off the fields. Kale came out at sunrise. His own clothes, returned from the camp. Dark, well-made, cut to fit someone with his particular dimensions. They made him look like what he was. Not the version of what he was that had borrowed her grandfather's trousers and dried her grandmother's dishes, but the other version, the one with 20 riders and pack law and 12 territories in the northern lands. She was glad she had seen both. He crossed the garden to the gate, and she held out the second cup. He took it. Their fingers overlapped briefly on the cup, the way hands do when something passes between them. "South-facing side," he said, "for the new rosemary shoots. Mid-morning sun. I know how to grow rosemary." "I know you do. Then you can stop telling me. I can stop saying it out loud." She looked at him. "Come back before the passes freeze. I don't want to treat another bolt wound when the ground is hard. I'll avoid the bolt. Try harder than you did last time." He handed back the empty cup. He looked at her for a long moment, long enough that she felt the weight of it, the shape of what was in it, the thing that did not have a name yet but was becoming the outline of one. "Nara," he said. "Kale," she said. He walked to his horse. She watched from the gate until the tree line took them. 20 riders, and Rin and the Alpha King of 12 northern territories, disappearing into the morning mist, the way things disappear when the world closes around them. She stood after the sound of horses was gone. Then she went inside, washed the cups, and went out to the garden. The rosemary was doing something in the morning light, all 3 new shoots standing straight, the plant fuller than it had been in weeks, the silver green catching the early sun like it had decided to make a statement about perseverance. "Don't let it go to your head," she told it. She got to work. Later. She did not count the days exactly, only that it was before the cold properly arrived, which meant he had paid attention to what she said. She heard horses again on the northern path. She was in the garden, pulling the last of the autumn weeds from around the kale, her hands in the good cold dirt, the afternoon light going long and gold across the beds. She did not go to the gate. She kept working and listened to the sound come through the trees and slow on the path and stop. The gate opened. Boots on the path. One set, unhurried. She pulled one more weed. "You're in my kale again," she said. "The path," he said from behind her, "is clearly to the right of the kale. I am standing on the path." She sat back on her heels and looked up at him. He was alone this time. Just him and a horse tied at the gate, and the whole northern sky behind him going the deep blue of late autumn. He had been traveling, and had not stopped anywhere that required him to look presentable about it, and he did not look like he had found this a problem. "Where's Rhine?" she asked. Managing the council and 3 other things simultaneously, and being professionally aggrieved about at least one of them. He looked at the garden. "He says to tell you he's sleeping in a real bed." "Good," she said. "He deserved one. He'd argue he doesn't need it. He'd be wrong." She stood, brushed dirt from her hands and her knees. She looked at him, the not borrowed clothes, the northern road still on him, the face that showed less than it held and had held more than usual for the last however many weeks. "Tea?" she said. "Yes. And then you're going to tell me what you actually said to the rosemary. The exact words." Something moved in his face. "I told it what you'd replace it with," he said, "and I told it that would be a pity, because you're the only person I've encountered in 11 years who bothers to talk to the difficult things." She looked at him. He looked back. "Tea," she said. "Yes," he said. She walked to the cottage. He followed. The gate stayed open behind them the way it always did now, because neither of them thought to close it, and the clay bowl sat at the gate post where it had sat for weeks, keeping its place the way things keep their places when they have decided they belong somewhere. The rosemary caught the last afternoon light and stood very straight. At the tree line, because Rin was thorough, and because some habits did not break just because you had been given a real bed and direct permission to rest, a single rider on a gray horse sat very still and watched the cottage door close and permitted himself, very privately, one small satisfied exhale. Then he turned around and rode toward the village inn, where there was a bed and a hot meal and 8 days of missed sleep waiting for him. He had earned all of it. The debt, by any accounting that had ever mattered, had long since begun to pay itself in the only direction that counted, not obligation to obligation, not law to law, the small, daily, unglamorous direction of one person choosing, again and again, to come back to the same gate. And Nara, who had spent her whole life tending things that were hurt and too proud to say so, who had learned from a long line of women before her that the most important thing you could do for something suffering was simply to be present with it without making it explain, Nara understood, finally, that the clay bowl she had filled 3 times with broth was doing something more than feeding a wounded animal. It had been saying, "You are not too much, you are not inconvenient, you are welcome here, just as you are, with the bolt still in you." She had not known she was saying it. The rosemary had listened. The rabbit had been placed on the step. The boots had come back up the garden path. Inside the cottage, the kettle went on. 2 cups on the table. The fire caught the new wood and held. Some things, it turned out, did not resolve. They grew. Everything else, they would figure out as they went. Rin came to visit on a Thursday, 3 weeks after the Alpha King had gone back north. He came alone, which she suspected was intentional. He rode the gray horse and knocked at the gate with the polite, measured knock of someone who had decided to be there and was not going to pretend he had just been passing by. Nara was at the workbench when she heard it. She went to the gate and found him standing there with his gray horse and a package wrapped in cloth that he held slightly awkwardly, the way people hold things they're giving someone when they're not entirely sure how the giving will be received. "Rin," she said. "Nara," he said. "I hope this isn't inconvenient." "It's Thursday," she said. "Thursday is fine." She opened the gate wider. "Come in." He tied his horse at the post and followed her inside. She put the kettle on because she always put the kettle on, and because it gave him somewhere to look while he decided how to start whatever he'd come to say. "He sent this," Rin said, setting the package on the table. "I was coming south anyway. There's a situation with one of the border packs that needed my attention, so I offered." "What is it?" "He didn't tell me. He said you'd know." She untied the cloth. Inside, a small pot of something dark, a soil mixture, rich and dense, and smelling of mountain loam, and tucked beside it, wrapped separately in a piece of soft leather, 3 small rosemary cuttings from what looked like an old established plant. The roots were carefully damp. The cuttings were healthy, just cut, the kind that would take if you planted them right. She stood looking at them for a moment. "The south-facing side," she said. Rin looked at her. He told me the new chutes needed the south-facing side, she said. More sun. He was right about the angle. She set the cuttings down carefully. These are from his territory? The kitchen garden at the northern seat, Rin said. The head gardener was very confused about the request. Apparently, he asked several questions that were not answered. Nara put the kettle tea in the cups and sat down. Rin sat across from her with the cautious ease of a man who had decided to try being somewhere instead of just being professionally present in it. "How is he?" she asked. Rin was quiet for a moment. "Different," he said. Then, more carefully, "Better, I think. It's hard to." He stopped. "He's always been good at the work. The pack politics, the decisions, the things that need an alpha king to do them and to be seen doing them. He never struggled with that, but there's a difference between doing the work well and being fully present for it. And now he argues with the gardener about rosemary varieties," Rin said. "Last week he sat in a council meeting, and in the middle of Lord Devan's third formal concern of the morning, he said, 'Has anyone here ever been told you've got exactly the right kind of face for threats?' And then went back to listening as if he hadn't said anything." Nara looked at her tea. "Lord Devan was very confused," Rin added. "I imagine so." Rin drank his tea. Outside, the autumn had gone properly cold now, the kind of cold that settled in and meant business, the kind that made the cottage feel more like a refuge and less like just where she happened to live. She had put extra wood in last week. She had made the larder count. She had, without announcing it to herself, been doing the kinds of things you did when you expected to be somewhere for a while. "He'll come back before the passes freeze," Rin said. "He told me to tell you that. He already told me. He wanted me to confirm it." She looked up. Rin was looking at his cup with the expression of a man who was choosing his next words from a very large selection. "You can say whatever you came to say," she said. "I don't mind directness." He looked at her. "I know," he said. "That's actually what I wanted to say. That I know." He paused. "In 11 years, and I have been with him for 9 of those 11. I have not seen him send rosemary cuttings to anyone. I have not seen him sit in a council meeting and use a phrase that came from a conversation with a private individual. I have not seen him." He stopped again. "Settle," he said finally. "Even for a few weeks." "He's not settled," she said. "He's in the north, with 12 packs and a council and Lord Davin's formal concerns." "No," Rin agreed, "but part of him is here. I can tell when part of him is somewhere." He met her eyes. "It looks different on him." "Lighter." She was quiet for a moment. "The debt," she said. "I know what the debt is," Rin said. "I also know he didn't invoke it because he needed the legal structure. He invoked it because it was the only language he had available for 'I want a reason to come back to this specific place.'" She looked at the rosemary cuttings on her table, the careful wrapping, the mountain soil. "He could have just said that," she said. "He couldn't," Rin said, simply. "Not yet. Not then." A pause. "He's getting better at it." She got up and refilled the kettle, not because it was empty, but because she needed to move. She stood at the basin and looked out at the garden, the new rosemary shoots that had been growing steadily since his conversation with them, the kale that had gone through a good season, the bare patch of earth where a very large wolf had lain and bled and been given broth from a bowl too large for any ordinary purpose. "How does it work?" she asked. "The bond. After the debt is settled, assuming it ever is." "There's no legal structure for after," Rin said. "The old law covers the debt period. What comes after is just." He seemed to search for the word. "Custom," he said finally. "History. People who chose each other after the debt was done. And does that happen? After the debt?" "Rarely," Rin said. "The debt itself is rare. In my time with him, he's only invoked it twice. The first time," he paused. "The first time was 11 years ago. The debt resolved and the person moved on. He didn't try to follow, and he stopped staying places." "Yes." She turned back to the room. Rin was looking at her with the direct, steady look of someone who had decided to be honest and was following it through to the end. "He's not going to do that this time," Rin said. "Just so you know, he's not going to follow if you move on. But he's also—" A pause. He's not going to try to do what he did last time. Go back to the moving. I don't think he can. Now, I think he's used up that option. She sat back down. That's a heavy thing to tell me. I know, he said. I thought you should have the information anyway. They sat with it for a moment. Outside, the cold afternoon was going quieter, the way cold afternoons did when the sun started thinking about setting and everything contracted into itself to wait out the dark. He could have told me this himself, she said. Yes, Rin said. He's going to. I just wanted you to hear it from someone who watched it happen the first time. He drank the last of his tea. So you could decide how to answer before he asks. She looked at him. You're a good beta. I try to be. He stood. Thank you for the tea. She walked him to the gate. He untied his horse, mounted with the ease of someone who had done it too many times to count, and looked down at her from the gray horse in the cold afternoon. The cuttings should go in before the first frost, he said, deep enough that the roots have room, south-facing. I know how to plant rosemary, she said. I know, he said. He told me. He rode south toward whatever needed attending in the border situation, and Nara went inside and looked at the rosemary cuttings on her kitchen table for a long moment. Then she got her gloves and her trowel and went out to the south-facing side of the garden. She planted the cuttings in the late afternoon cold, working carefully, making sure the roots had room the way good roots needed room, not crushed together, not too spread, just enough space to decide where they wanted to go. She used the mountain soil from the pot. She packed it in around them. She sat back on her heels and looked at them. 3 from his garden, the old established plant at the northern seat. A kitchen garden she had never seen, in a territory she had never been to, belonging to someone who had sent the cuttings south with his first beta, and a message that was not quite a message, and was also completely a message. You're from the north, she told them. So you know about cold. You'll be fine here. She went inside and washed her hands and made dinner, and the cottage was warm and the dark came in early the way it did in late autumn, and she sat by the fire with her book and listened to the sound of the wind outside and felt, without announcing it, something very much like settled. He came back on the last warm day of the year. She didn't know it was the last warm day until afterward, those things you only know in retrospect. When the cold comes and you think, that was the last of it, that particular afternoon was the last one before everything changed for the season. The sky was deep and clear, and the light had that specific autumn quality that was almost warm, even though the air wasn't, the kind of light that made everything look like a painting of itself. She was in the orchard when she heard the horse. She had the apple press going, a small one, just for her own cider, just enough to get through the dark months with something sweet in the evenings, and she was turning the handle and thinking about nothing in particular when she heard the gate and then boots on the path, not the garden path this time, but the orchard path, which meant he had gone around the cottage to find her. You found the orchard, she said. I followed the smell, he said, coming around the apple press to stand beside her. It's working? Well enough. He looked at the press, at the bucket of apples waiting, at the cloudy gold liquid going into the collection jar. Can I help? She handed him the handle. He turned it without question, without adjusting the pace too fast the way people did when they wanted to show you how strong they were. Just turned it at the pace it had been going. She added more apples. They worked through the bucket in the warm afternoon light, and she told him about Rin's visit, and the cuttings and where she'd planted them, and he told her about the council and Lord Devon's 4 formal concerns and a situation in the Eastern Territory that had resolved before it became a problem, which was the best outcome. He told her about the garden at the northern seat, and the head gardener who had been very confused about the rosemary request and had asked if a different cutting would do just as well, and Kale had said no, this specific plant, and the gardener had looked at him for a long moment and then gone to get it without asking any more questions. Why that specific plant? She asked. It's old, he said. Older than the current building. Whatever was there before, the plant was there. It's been through every winter the northern seat has had. You thought it would survive transplanting. I thought the roots were deep enough that it knew how. She looked at him. He was looking at the press, turning the handle, the late light on his face. Rin told me, she said, about the first time. The first debt. He didn't stop turning the handle. I thought he might. He wanted me to know before you said it yourself. That sounds like Rin. He's thorough. Yes. A pause. Did it change anything? Knowing. She thought about this carefully. She thought about the afternoon she had planted the cuttings, and the fire that night, and the feeling she had not announced to herself. No, she said. It confirmed some things. He looked at her then. That direct look, the one that was not the almost smile, and not the patience. I'm going to say the thing Rin told you I was going to say, he said, and I'd like to say it without the legal structure of the debt. All right, she said. I want to come back, he said, not to discharge the debt. To come back because this is where I want to come back to. He held her gaze. To you. To the kale and the rosemary, and the clay bowl by the gate, and the way you talk to things when you think they're not listening. I want to come back to all of it. To you specifically. The apple press dripped quietly into the jar. The passes, she said, not blocked yet. You'd need to go back after. Yes, and come back after that. The northern seat is a long ride. I know. And you have 12 packs and a council, and Lord Davin's ongoing formal concerns. I know. And I live on the edge of a forest, and talk to my herbs, and I'm not going to change that. I know, he said. I'm not asking you to. She looked at her apple press. At the last warm light of the year, going gold through the orchard. At the man standing beside her, turning the handle at exactly the right pace, waiting. All right, she said. All right. Come back, she said, before the passes. And after the cold, and the season after that. Something in his face settled. Not closed, the opposite. Like something that had been held carefully open in case it needed to close again, had been set down. Before the passes, he said. Yes. She handed him another apple. He put it in the press. The afternoon light went long and golden through the trees, and the cider dripped into the jar, and they worked through the last of the apples in the comfortable quiet of two people who had said the important thing and could now afford to be ordinary about it. Later she would try to remember what they had talked about after, and she couldn't. She remembered the light. She remembered the sound of the press. She remembered that at some point he had started telling her something about the kitchen garden at the northern seat, the layout of it, the beds, which direction the morning light came from, and she had realized he was describing it because he was thinking about whether things she grew would do well there, and she had not said anything about this, had just listened and filed it under. Later, under one thing at a time. The passes would close in 3 weeks. He was gone by morning, the way he always went. Early, quiet, a cup left on the table to show he had made his own tea before he left. The horse tracks in the frost on the path. The gate left open. She found a note this time. Not much. His handwriting was spare in the same way his speaking was. Before the thaw, it said. And below that, in different ink, like it had been added after. The south-facing side is doing well. She put the note in the book she was reading, in the place she'd left off. She went out to the south-facing side of the garden. The rosemary cuttings, the ones from the northern seat, from the old established plant, the ones with roots deep enough to know how to survive, had put out new growth. Small, green, insistent. You're from a long way away, she told them. But you're doing fine. They did not answer. They just kept growing, which was the only answer that had ever mattered. Nara went inside. She put the kettle on. She sat down at her table in the good morning light with her book and her tea and her cottage at the edge of the forest, and she felt, simply, like herself, which was all she had ever wanted, and which had turned out to be enough, and which had also turned out to be something more than enough, something she did not have an old word for yet, but was in the process of learning. The kettle boiled. She made the tea. She made 2 cups.